I got a question for you. What if I told you that I was going to take your child away from you? The child that was born and brought to you, you held in your arms, you kissed and you named. At age 5, that I was going to take that child away from you, somewhere around there, and keep them for 8 hours a day for 8 years so that I can remove their free will, their curiosity, make sure that they follow orders of a perceived authority, and that they will have an immense hyper sense of nationalism, and that they would become basically pawns in a society for the use of corporation. Would you give your child to me? Absolutely not, you wouldn't. And that's exactly why they do not tell you about the origin and the intent of the American educational system. Today we're talking about that, the American educational system. We're going to talk about the origins, the intent, and ultimately the legacy, what has become of it in the United States. So just imagine this, it's the mid-1800s, and you're an oil mogul, and you're having a problem. The problem is this: we have an ever-expanding industry, but we have very few positions being filled. We have an enormous amount of work to do, but we do not have the workforce. So now what would you do if you were a rich billionaire, millionaire, whatever the term was at the time? Let's say, for instance, by the name of J.D. Rockefeller. If you had that type of money and you had a problem of workers, would you invest that money? I'm asking. Would you, no matter what amount that money would be at the time? Now, obviously, money for him wasn't a problem. Would you invest that money into a mechanism that would turn, at the time, rural, subsisting Americans that lived in rural America on farms? Would you take your money and invest it into a process that would turn these rural Americans into dutiful workers? I think you would, and that's exactly what he did. He saw the big picture. Rockefeller invested his money into creating what we now know as the American public system. He invested millions of dollars and erected hundreds of schools throughout the United States to educate, that was the intent, the American population to work inside of his industrial complex. But what he found out is that even though the system was put in place and his influence and his power made it happen directly, that the process was not yielding good workers. It was actually yielding people, young people, once they left the system, that were exactly as intended, that their free will, their motivation, the self-determination was ripped away from them, or the intent was as much as they could, and that they were subjected to neo or hyper nationalism, and they were also designed to follow orders. But they were pretty much stupid coming out of school. So the process, just like many other fixes, and this is what happens with entrepreneurs, business people, people that attempt to solve problems. The first take at solving the problem normally doesn't solve the problem. You know what I mean? You set out the prototype, you see how it works, and then you make tweaks to it. And so Rockefeller and all the other moguls during the time that were invested in this education system realized there were some tweaks that needed to be made to this system. The children were coming out without, they needed a curriculum, because the children were coming out without basic rudimentary skills they needed to be matriculated or moved into a worker situation in the industrial complex. So the next portion of the plan took place, and in came a gentleman by the name of Horace Mann. But before Horace Mann became important, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and all the others took their influential money. They couldn't affect the entire country with this tweak they needed to make. But they could start with the states and some of the biggest ones. And in particular, they started with Massachusetts. The first thing they did with Massachusetts is that after putting their money in the right place, they had a board established for education, the Massachusetts Educational Board, or Board of Education. And then the second part of this plan was implemented. They needed a pawn, and the pawn's name was Horace Mann. Horace Mann has been championed as the father of education in the United States. And when looking up his name and listening to some of the biographical information, all I saw was his selfless desire, his altruism, his desire to educate the masses because education was a good thing. But his sentiment and his reasoning and his intent for doing what he did in education could not be farther from that sentiment. That was a complete lie. Horace Mann was commissioned by the moguls for his state to come up with a curriculum. Now, the first thing he did when he was elected in, I believe, 1837, 9 or 10 years after that, he made school mandatory. Prior to that point, it had not been mandatory. So he made school mandatory. So it was a state-sanctioned law that you would have to give up your child for 8 years minimum, for 8 hours a day. So that was the first thing he did. Now, all of the population thought it was a great thing. They're instilling and reinstilling education. But what he was really doing was ingraining and indoctrinizing the process of mind control and societal engineering and manipulation. So he had that accomplished. The workers were still coming out kind of stupid. And he had to deliver to his masters. So what Horace Mann did is that he had to research all of the other models he could find. He was looking for something. And when he came across Prussia, he found it. Now let's talk about Prussia for just a moment. Prussia is modern-day Germany now. But Prussia had lost the war in the late 1700s called the 7-Year War. And the reason they had lost this war, they had cited, was that the soldiers were not following orders. So being born and studying this information, Johann Gottlieb Fichte, which is a Prussian, or what we would call a German philosopher at the time, was, I dare say, one of the smartest people of his time. He figured out that human conditioning done at the earliest portion of someone's life could not be reversed. And so they set out to condition the military first, so that soldiers, when it came to wartime, followed orders, had a hypersense of neo-Nazism type of allegiance to their country, and that they were devoid of free will and free determination. And so they implemented this for just soldiers, but it worked so well that they expanded this type of psychological programming to the entire population in Prussia. This, by the way, tragically so, set the framework for Hitler and the Third Reich. Why did it do that? Because it took a generation of people, a generation before Hitler. It conditioned them to be uber in Germany, hyper in English, hyper in Germany, uber. It taught them to have an uber sense of nationalism, to follow orders unconditionally, to not be free thinkers, to not be creative, and not to have free will. And once you got a whole population programmed in this way, they were ripe for someone like Hitler to come along, to take control, to be authoritative, and to instruct the entire nation to do his bidding. So this is the system that Horace Mann, the gentleman whose name is all over buildings, educational institutes all throughout the country. There's one that is right in the neighborhood here in Los Angeles that I hear about all the time, but I didn't know who he was. And then after reading some information and doing research, I also found out that his name is also on a school, an elite school in the Bronx, New York City, of all places. The other place, my origin, where I was born. So his name is everywhere. And this is the gentleman that we herald as the champion and the father of education. His job was given to him by the elites, the rich people. He went into Congress on the Massachusetts state level, and he did their bidding. Why? Because they had millions and millions of dollars by way to convince him with. Nothing has changed. Politicians do what they've always been doing. They gravitate towards the money. So now after he instilled the program, something was missing, the curriculum. And in Prussia, the curriculum of how to educate Americans, even though the educational system had been in existence for about 200 years or so, public school was in existence. However, there wasn't a curriculum. And the curriculum was that of corporate America, not from a position of altruism for someone who cared about people and the livelihood of their constituents. So no, it was not because it was a goodwill thing to do. It was because rich people needed workers. Here's a quote from J.D. Rockefeller himself. J.D. Rockefeller said this. He said, I do not need a nation of thinkers. I need a nation of workers. This is the gentleman that commissioned the state of Massachusetts to ingrain education. So do you think that based on that information, that your child was going to school to be taught how to be an individual? I hope not at this point. So this is the legacy, the intent, the purpose of the American educational system. And to sum this up to some degree, let me share this with you, a chronology of some sort. In 1903, the General Education Board was established in the United States on the efforts of Horace Mann. On the national level, $3.5 billion at the time was astronomical. Today, not as effective, but $3.5 billion during that time was proportioned by Congress to establish officially the American educational public system. Now, there were dissenters. There were people that in 1914 in governments that cited and spoke of the corporate takeover of the educational system. But by then, after almost 100 years of working on this problem, the corporations, J.D. Rockefeller and the Carnegies that have infused all the money into the educational process, it was too late. It could not be reversed. The thing they did that was extremely instrumental in this process as well is that after establishing the control of the curriculum, which means now Carnegie, Rockefeller, they were printing books and putting them in schools. But you had to control one other element. It was the teacher. And they didn't forget that. They specifically trained and hired white women and placed them as the foundational workers, the foundational purveyors of the control they needed to have over people and children in particular. They enlisted white women. Always the Trojan horse. So white women were extremely instrumental in walking into classrooms and making sure they execute the social engineering program that was given to them. On the backs of them, we can say thank you for creating a society of people that have to figure out who they are, what they need to be, and are lost in their 40s. So now, what is the legacy of this system? Well, we have a university system that today has become completely gynocentric. It's designed to pull you in, get you involved, get you in debt, and put you out to work for the uses of corporations. If you do not have a spirit of self-will, predetermination, creativity, and a sense of where you're going, you'll get caught up. The reason why I created the Legacy of Learning is so that people like you and me can have an effect on the young people around us. So now we know, now what? The point, once again, of the Legacy of Learning is so that we can instill the basic rudimentary skills that we need as individuals and then move on to our calling, the complete opposite of what they would like us to do. The university system was designed for elites. It wasn't for regular people like you and me. You had to be accepted. And when there were few universities, most of us weren't afforded the gift of higher education. But guess what did happen though? These higher learning institutions were funded by tax dollars. And so all of us, and by and large, and if we were to take Massachusetts, for example, or some of the southern states during those times, they were run, and the constituencies, they were run by people, black people, that were very much involved in the process of economy. They were taxed, but they didn't receive the benefit of those taxes. State schools were erected, and black people could not go to them. They were designated to go to small community colleges, by the way, that were poorly kept. So even though they collected money from everyone, and by and large, the vast majority of black people paid more taxes at that time because of the numbers in the state and our progress, we still were cheated out of the money that was used for public education. So even though it was implemented and used to somehow create a population of workers that were devoid of their own free will, they found an extra ingredient to make sure that black people were much worse off. Because that's the metric, right? In order for white people to feel good, black people gotta feel super bad. And if that's the case, then white people are happy. And so you fool them too. So everyone was fooled in this process. And today, like myself, for example, and I'm gonna end with a story as I always do. I was always a GDI, a goddamn independent. And I learned that word in college when they were trying to get me to pledge it into one of the frats, and I wasn't really with it. I didn't see the point of it. I was always that way. I remember being in the 8th grade, just moving to California. I'm in class, the first class, the morning class. I'm in government. And the teacher's a black teacher, a cool guy, someone I could relate to, a black man, so I was lucky. But when the national anthem was sung, I didn't sing it. And when the Pledge of Allegiance came on, I didn't recite it. I didn't put my hand over my heart, and I didn't stand up. He pointed me out and he said, son, basically, you need to follow the rules in this school and the Pledge of Allegiance. And I summarily told him, I don't pledge allegiance to anyone or anything but the man upstairs. He punished me. He said, okay, well, stand by your desk. You can't sit down because if you're not going to follow the rules, you're going to stand until you do. I remember standing, I'm not sure for how long. But after a while, he finally gave in. He said, you know what? Have a seat, man. I can't be mad at you for what you stand for. And that's what I hope for you. I hope at some point, at somewhere in your life, that you can reach back to a moment that you were instilled with self-preservation, self-determination, creativity, free will, the things God gave you to become who you need to be so you can fulfill His purpose. I hope that thing was not rubbed out of you during those 8 years, 12 years, 15 years of indoctrination. But our women, I'm speaking for black people here now, and our women are completely lost. They've bought into this system. And they won't let it go. So now you know, what are you going to do about it? The legacy of learning. So going through this chronology before I leave. 1903, the General Board of Education, $3.5 billion were infused and used through the governmental process to erect all of the high schools, junior high schools, and to also fund universities along with private funding, because they kept doing that as well. And in 1906, Andrew Carnegie founded the teaching charter through Congress, and basically it was to champion the profession of teaching. He needed to pump up the professional persona and profile of teaching so that it becomes something that we wanted to do. And it was something that millions of people did thereafter. They were influenced by this campaign. And what we have today is the legacy of that need by just a few set of individuals that decided to shape the American landscape. Why do we do it? Because of that. It's not something that was always here. We literally live inside of a construct, a business plan of a few rich white men to take the population of the United States and turn them into workers, mindless workers, based on a paradigm that they got from Prussia, which was designed to control and manipulate soldiers so that they wouldn't leave the battlefield. We now have people being programmed psychologically to be their worst for their personal benefit, but at the same time benefit the state. It's on a mass level now. We send all of our children to these schools. We've doubled down on it, and now we've turned it into a system under which we spend the most of our adult life going through these systems and paying off the cost of it. So imagine, how well did his business plan work? I say it was masterfully successful. Not only do we go to schools now and we ask for programming for free, we now pay for the privilege, end up in debt, and spend half our lives working for the people that designed the program so that we can work for them. We spend half our lives paying off the debt to the universities that they chartered and are also making money. I couldn't figure out a better system to use on you. Now you know what you're going to do. And this is what I do here on the Legacy of Learning. I hope you don't mind. I would like you to do a couple things for me. I would like you to add something new to your bag every day, pardon me, every week. I try to squeeze two words together. And continue that so much so that it becomes part of who you are and what you are remembered for. So information in times like these is something that you are aware of. And instead of finding out about it, you're sharing this information on a daily basis with those that need to have it. Become a pillar in the legacy of learning. I'm Ron Raphael. Please visit legacylearningq.com. That's two words. Legacy Learning with a 3 at the end of it. .com. Pick up your free GPA cheat sheet. And also, if you'd like a consultation for the course, the book, and how to increase the academic production of the young people around you and yourself, if you're still in school as an adult or still taking courses or still have to take continuing education in any field, this is a treasure. The Legacy of Learning. I'll catch you guys next time. Ron Raphael. Peace.